Benito Mussolini. Benito Mussolini invented modern fascism. He ruled Italy from 1922 as Il Duce, the leader, aligning his country with Adolf Hitler and dragging Italy into the catastrophe of World War II. As Allied forces closed in on Italy in 1943, Mussolini was ousted by his own Grand Council and briefly imprisoned. Hitler's forces rescued him, installing him as a puppet ruler in northern Italy. But by April 1945, Germany was collapsing. Mussolini attempted to flee to Switzerland, disguised inside a German military convoy. On April 27th, Italian communist partisans stopped the convoy near Lake Como and discovered him hiding inside a German overcoat in the back of a truck. He was arrested and the following day executed by firing squad, along with his mistress, Clara Petacci. Their bodies were then driven to Milan and hung upside down by their feet from the metal girders of a gas station on the Piazzale Loreto, the same square where Mussolini's forces had publicly displayed the bodies of executed partisans just a year before. Crowds gathered in their thousands. The man who had promised Italy greatness ended as a spectacle for the city he once lorded over. Nicolae Ceaușescu ruled Romania for over 2 decades as one of Eastern Europe's most eccentric and brutal dictators. He built a megalomaniacal palace in Bucharest, the second largest administrative building in the world, while his people stood in lines for bread. Secret police monitored citizens around the clock. Dissent meant imprisonment or death. In December 1989, as communist governments fell across Eastern Europe, protests erupted in the Romanian city of Timișoara. Ceaușescu ordered troops to fire on the crowds. The massacre ignited a national uprising. On December 21st, Ceaușescu attempted to address a crowd in Bucharest. Live on national television, the crowd began to boo him. The look of disbelief on his face became one of the most iconic images of the 20th century. He and his wife Elena fled by helicopter from the roof of the Communist Party headquarters. They were captured within hours. On December 25th, Christmas Day, they were brought before a hasty military tribunal, convicted of genocide and crimes against the state, and taken to a courtyard. Elena screamed as they were let out. Moments later, both were shot by a firing squad. The entire fall from power to execution took less than 4 days. Muammar Gaddafi. Muammar Gaddafi seized power in Libya in 1969 through a military coup and ruled for 42 years. He funded terrorism, ordered the bombing of civilian aircraft, and brutally suppressed opposition. He styled himself as the brother leader and the king of kings of Africa. He used Libya's vast oil wealth to project power and to silence enemies at home and abroad. In 2011, the Arab Spring reached Libya. A civil war erupted. NATO-backed rebel forces swept across the country, and Gaddafi's regime collapsed. He went into hiding. For months, he evaded capture, moving between loyalist strongholds. On October 20th, a NATO airstrike hit a convoy trying to escape the city of Sirte, Gaddafi's birthplace. He survived the strike and fled on foot, hiding inside a concrete drainage pipe alongside a handful of remaining guards. He was found by rebel fighters. Videos captured the chaotic scene. Gaddafi, bloodied and dazed, dragged from the pipe, pleading with fighters not to shoot. He was beaten and humiliated as the crowd closed in. He was killed in the melee, shot in the head. For a man who had ordered the deaths of thousands and lived in palatial excess for decades, his final hiding place was a hole in the ground. He was 69 years old. Samuel Doe. Samuel Doe came to power in Liberia in 1980 through one of the most violent coups in West African history, storming the presidential palace, killing President William Tolbert, and having 13 cabinet ministers publicly executed on a beach as a crowd watched. He was a master sergeant at the time, 28 years old. His 10 years in power were marked by ethnic massacres, election fraud, and the gutting of Liberia's public institutions. By 1990, a civil war led by rebel factions, including Charles Taylor's National Patriotic Front, had surrounded the capital, Monrovia. Doe foolishly agreed to meet with a West African peacekeeping commander at a port facility on September 9, 1990. A rival rebel leader, Prince Johnson, ambushed the meeting with his forces. Doe was captured, tortured for hours, and killed. Johnson's men filmed the entire ordeal. The footage was subsequently copied and circulated widely across West Africa, a chilling document of a brutal end for a brutal man. Liberia's civil war would continue for another 14 years, consuming an entire generation. Park Chung-hee. Park Chung-hee seized power in South Korea through a military coup in 1961 and ruled for 18 years.
Under his regime, political opponents were tortured and imprisoned. He built South Korea's economy, but at the cost of brutal authoritarian suppression of civil rights and free speech.
By 1979, his grip on power was fracturing. Mass protests had broken out across the country. Park grew increasingly paranoid and isolated. He retreated into a world of private dinners and trusted advisors, people he believed were loyal. That trust would cost him everything. On the night of October 26, 1979, Park attended a private dinner at a safe house operated by the Korean Central Intelligence Agency. The guests included close aides and the KCIA director himself, Kim Jae-gyu. Over the meal, an argument broke out. Then, without warning, Kim pulled a pistol and shot Park's chief bodyguard.
Park stared in disbelief. Before he could react, Kim turned the gun on him and fired. Park Chung-hee, the man who had ruled South Korea with an iron fist for nearly 2 decades, was killed at a dinner table by the head of his own intelligence service. He was 61 years old. His assassin claimed it was done to save Korean democracy.
Ngo Dinh Diem. Ngo Dinh Diem was the first president of South Vietnam, installed with American backing in the 1950s. His government was deeply Catholic, deeply corrupt, and deeply unpopular. He persecuted Buddhist monks, rigged elections, and ruled through a network of family loyalists, most notably his feared brother, Ngo Dinh Yu.
By 1963, even his American allies had lost patience with him. Buddhist protests had turned international after monks set themselves on fire in the streets. Washington began quietly signaling to South Vietnamese generals that a change in leadership would not be opposed. That signal was all the generals needed. On November 1, 1963, military units surrounded the presidential palace in Saigon. Diem and his brother escaped through a secret passage and fled to a Catholic church in Cholon, a suburb of the city. They called for negotiations. The generals agreed to safe passage. It was a lie. The next morning, Diem and his brother were picked up and placed inside an armored personnel carrier. As the vehicle traveled through the city toward military headquarters, shots rang out inside. When the doors were opened, both brothers were dead, hands tied, bodies riddled with bullets and stab wounds. The official story called it a suicide. No one believed it. King Faisal of Saudi Arabia. King Faisal bin Abdulaziz ruled Saudi Arabia from 1964 and transformed it into a modern oil power. He was known as a sharp, devout, and politically shrewd ruler who played a central role in the 1973 oil embargo that reshaped the global economy. Few could have imagined that his end would come not from foreign enemies, but from inside his own royal family. On March 25, 1975, King Faisal was holding a public royal audience, a traditional gathering where citizens and dignitaries could approach the king directly. His nephew, Faisal bin Musaid, stepped forward as if to greet him. The king leaned in. His nephew drew a pistol and fired at point-blank range, striking the king in the chin and ear. King Faisal was rushed to hospital but died of his wounds shortly after. His assassin, Prince Faisal bin Musaid, was arrested immediately. He was examined by psychiatrists, found legally responsible, and publicly beheaded in Riyadh 3 months later. The motive was never fully confirmed, but theories have ranged from personal vengeance to political extremism.
Thomas Sankara. Thomas Sankara was unlike most leaders on this list. He was beloved. The young Marxist revolutionary took power in Burkina Faso in 1983 and immediately launched radical reforms, renaming the country, empowering women, planting millions of trees, and refusing foreign aid to preserve national independence.
He drove a modest car, refused a presidential salary, and sold off the government's fleet of Mercedes vehicles. Western governments and the International Monetary Fund resented him. But perhaps most dangerously, the man closest to him, his best friend and fellow revolutionary, Blaise Compaoré, was growing ambitious. On October 15, 1987, Sankara was attending a routine meeting at the headquarters of the National Revolutionary Council in Ouagadougou. Armed soldiers loyal to Compaoré stormed the building. Sankara reportedly stepped outside calmly to protect his colleagues, saying the trouble was only with him personally. He was shot immediately. 12 of his aides were killed alongside him. Sankara was 37 years old. Blaise Compaoré took power the same day and ruled Burkina Faso for the next 27 years. Sankara's body was hastily buried in an unmarked grave. It wasn't until 2022 that his remains were formally identified through DNA testing. He remains one of Africa's most mourned leaders,
killed by the one man he trusted most.
Rafael Trujillo, known as El Jefe, the Chief, ruled the Dominican Republic from 1930 with a terror so complete that the era is simply called the Trujillato. He renamed the capital city after himself. He had thousands of Haitian migrants massacred. He ordered the murders of political opponents across multiple countries. Even the Catholic Church eventually condemned him. By 1961, the CIA had grown alarmed by Trujillo's destabilizing influence in the Caribbean, particularly after the Cuban Revolution. Washington quietly supplied weapons to a group of Dominican dissidents who had been plotting against him for years. On the night of May 30th, Trujillo was driven along a coastal highway outside the capital when multiple vehicles intercepted his car. A gunfight erupted at roadside. Trujillo, armed and fierce even at 69, tried to fight back. He was hit multiple times. When the shooting stopped, El Jefe was dead. His body was stuffed into the trunk of a car. The conspirators were later hunted down by Trujillo's son, and most were killed or tortured. But the dictator was gone, and his dynasty collapsed within months.
Anwar Sadat. Anwar Sadat became president of Egypt in 1970. He launched the 1973 October War against Israel, then stunned the world by flying to Jerusalem and making peace, for which he received the Nobel Peace Prize in 1978. But to a growing Islamist movement within his own military, the peace deal with Israel was an unforgivable betrayal.
On October 6, 1981, Egypt held its annual military parade commemorating the 1973 war. Sadat sat in the reviewing stand in full military dress, watching aircraft fly overhead. A military truck in the parade suddenly stopped in front of the reviewing stand. Soldiers leapt out and hurled grenades. Lieutenant Khalid Islambuli, one of the lead assassins, ran directly at Sadat, firing an assault rifle at close range. Sadat was hit multiple times and died of his wounds shortly after. 10 others were killed in the attack. The assassins were members of Egyptian Islamic Jihad, a fundamentalist organization furious over the peace with Israel and Sadat's crackdown on Islamists. Islambuli was captured, tried, and executed. Sadat's successor, Hosni Mubarak, who was sitting nearby and survived, would rule Egypt for the next 30 years.
Luis Carrero Blanco. Luis Carrero Blanco was the chosen heir of Spanish dictator Francisco Franco, the man expected to carry Francoism into the next generation after Franco's death. He was appointed prime minister in 1973 and was seen as the regime's most powerful figure. He was also, to the Basque separatist organization ETA, the most important target in Spain. ETA operatives spent months preparing what they called Operation Ogro. They rented an apartment on a Madrid street Carrero Blanco traveled each morning after attending Mass. Working as fake sculptors, they tunneled beneath the road and packed the tunnel with over 80 kilograms of explosives. On December 20th, 1973, Carrero Blanco's armored car passed overhead. ETA detonated the charge. The explosion was so enormous that Carrero Blanco's vehicle, a heavy armored Dodge Dart, was launched 5 stories into the air, clearing the roof of an adjacent building and landing in an interior courtyard on the other side. Witnesses described seeing the car fly. Carrero Blanco and both of his guards were killed instantly. Franco reportedly wept when he heard the news. He would die himself less than 2 years later, and the Francoist regime would dissolve peacefully. Ion Antonescu. Ion Antonescu was Romania's wartime dictator who allied his country with Nazi Germany and sent Romanian forces deep into the Soviet Union. Under his regime, Romania became a willing participant in the Holocaust. Romanian troops and police murdered hundreds of thousands of Jews and Roma in mass shootings and brutal deportations. He was one of the most directly complicit leaders in Europe's genocide.
In August 1944, as Soviet forces advanced into Romania, King Michael I led a palace coup that removed Antonescu from power. He was arrested and handed over to Soviet authorities, then returned to Romania to stand trial. In May 1946, he was convicted by a Romanian People's Tribunal for war crimes and crimes against peace. He appealed, but the conviction was upheld.
On June 1, 1946, Ion Antonescu was executed by firing squad at the Jalava prison outside Bucharest. He refused a blindfold and reportedly gave the order to fire himself. He was 63 years old. His execution was one of the earliest prosecutions of a European head of state for war crimes, a precedent that would echo through international law for decades to come.
That's every major assassinated dictator we've covered today. But I want to hear from you, and I mean this as a genuine question, not an easy one. Were the ends these men met justice? Or did the violence of their deaths just continue the same cycle of brutality they began?
Drop your answer in the comments. I read every one. If you found this video worth your time, subscribe. There's more where this came from.